BS-Free Witchcraft is a production of the Nerd and Tie Podcast Network. Nerd and Tie produces podcasts ranging from actual play to true crime, and you can find more at nerdandtie.com or join our Discord by going to nerdandtie.com/Discord. Welcome to BS-Free Witchcraft, your monthly guide to the modern witchcraft movement, minus a lot of the usual, well, bullshit. I'm your host, Trey Dorn, and it is December of 2022, and we're going to have an interesting episode this month. You see, back in September of 2021, I did an episode on Mabon and Aidan Kelly. I'm pretty proud of that episode, but the one thing that's really easy to forget when we're talking about the modern witchcraft movement is when we talk about people directly, a lot of them are still around, you know, active. Like, we're not that old a movement. And there's always the risk that the person that you're talking about is going to hear it. And that's exactly what happened. You see, back in October, Aidan Kelly reached out to me and we had a really interesting conversation. And he let me record it so I could release it on the show. And so that's what most of this episode is going to be. One of the reasons why Aidan Kelly reached out to me was because in that episode, I stated that Aidan Kelly was an oathbreaker. And Aidan Kelly objects to that characterization. And that's the characterization. I said it because that's what Donald Frew said in the 90s about Aidan Kelly. And so that's where I was coming from. That was my source on that statement. Now, Aidan Kelly, again, disputes this. And look, I'm not here to tell you who to believe and who not to believe on this subject matter, but I think what gets lost a lot of the time in conversations about this sort of thing as people take sides, this is a disagreement between two human beings over something. And one person has their side of the story and the other, and a whole... There's this thing where we forget we're just a bunch of people, right? Like, one of the things about the modern witchcraft movement is no witch really is all that more important than any other random human being, but we still have these divisions over what is ultimately a disagreement between two people, and we let it affect and have these ripples. Yeah, so with that, I'm going to now cut to the conversation I had with Aidan. Now, I want to point out, I had zero time to prep for this. This was a spur of the moment conversation. So, and the video doesn't start, for those watching this on YouTube, it takes about a minute for me to get the video. The audio recording starts that way, but the video recording takes a moment to kick in. This is not a prepared interview. This is just two human beings talking. So please enjoy.
Well, I suppose the main thing to do is deal with Frew's accusation that I broke Gardnerian oaths. Because I honestly don't believe I ever have. And the priestess who did my first degree initiation is available, and she'll tell you about that too if you want. So where did this start from? Well, really, the thing that changed in my life that set this whole thing off is that I got sober. Yeah. I got to my first AA meeting on September 12th, 1976. I've been sober ever since. And, I was still active in the craft, but, after about 6 months, it was just too difficult. I mean, Circle was my favorite place to drink. And just not drinking in Circle, after 6 months was just too hard. So I just deactivated from the craft. As I've said, I just became inactive. I never resigned. Um, and so about March of 77, when that happened, one thing I did was put together a set of papers documenting the fact that, I'd written some of the most basic rituals for the Neruge when we were creating it. Um, because some of those has been published under three other people's names at that point. Um, and so having the documents that I had written was useful. And I included little summary history about the Neruge and like that. And I donated those papers to the GTU library, because that was where I was doing my doctoral program. Um, and Frew saw them. He got a copy of them. But in those papers, that's what he's claiming were names and addresses were published in, and they weren't.
Hmm.
Okay. The people listed in there I listed only, craft names, or sometimes, first name and initial, but only for people who didn't have really unusual first names. And there were no addresses whatsoever, you know. And, Frew knew that he was lying about that because that's what he was doing. But he could guess that very few
Yeah.
people ever try to get those papers from the library and
Right.
check up on him.
Well,
Um,
that's why I was, when I was going through the accusations, I was going like, even if the information was in those papers, is it really that like a public disclosure if you have to go through that much work to even find the information? You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
even if what he was saying was true, was it
Mhm.
really endangering anyone if someone had to go through all of those steps to get a hold of that information to begin with? I feel like it would be easier to like just try to stalk people off of the internet at that point, even then, with
Yeah,
Usenet.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, and my own research about craft history. I explained, in preface to the Corrupting Art of Magic and in Inventing Witchcraft about how I did this is about 1971, I got curious about Gardner's statements that his original covenant information had been fragmentary. And I wondered if you could identify in his rituals and writing what he had started with. I didn't expect to ever be able to see. You had to have his original papers.
Yeah.
Edited stuff wouldn't count. I didn't expect to ever see any of that stuff. Some coming somewhere would own it all. But really, to my surprise, it started falling into my lap. Um, Charles Clark, who had been Gardner's secretary for about the last 4 years of his life, had sent a set of Gardner's own Book of Shadows pages to Carl Weschke at Llewellyn,
Okay.
um, to pay a debt or something. And but he hadn't told Carl what they were. He just said papers that Gardner had sent to his approval. So Carl just basically saves them in a file. And I was doing research on the Old Laws document from the Book of Shadows, but two different versions had been published. And, being in a doctoral program, was applying text criticism to try to reconstruct what these two versions had diverged from. Sent that paper to Isaac Bonowitz, who was
Okay.
the editor of Carl's, Gnostica magazine.
Yeah.
And Isaac showed that to Carl, and he remembered, oh, he had this file of stuff, gave it to Isaac. Isaac read it and recognized what it was. It just, went into orbit. So he copied all that along with Gardner's correspondence to Carl in two different typefaces and handwritten like this, and sent all of that to me. And I could see what it was and started working um, on figuring out what was going on. which I did, and then a year later, I was able to go to the Ripley's headquarters in Toronto, and their director of research there showed me this manuscript book, the Book of Ye Art Magical, which contained the oldest known drafts of some of the basic
Hmm.
Book of Shadows rituals and like that. So I was able to put all of that together into a book. Um, and that book length manuscript was what satisfied my comprehensive examination on sociology of religion for my doctoral program. Um, and that manuscript, I written it under contract to Carl for publication. He turned it down. It was just too scholarly and too difficult for his readership. You know, um, so it didn't go any further. It wasn't my dissertation. It was a comp exam. My dissertation was a 3-act musical comedy uh, about the myth of Persephone turning it into a situation comedy. Um, and you know, and that's well, it's never been fully performed, but I published a script in a recent book that I've been using as a text for course I've been teaching for the Wilson Scene Seminary. I'm almost done with the course right now, and that's been a lot of fun. Um, okay, let me try not to lose track here. Um, anyway, so all of that research was done with publicly available materials. Anyone else could have gone to Carl or to Ripley's and found that material if they'd known what to look for.
Right.
Yeah, it didn't involve any kind of oaths because I didn't accept a Gardnerian initiation until 1987. 12 years later, and um, Meredith added a line to the initiation specifically saying that the oath of secrecy of the initiation did not apply to the research I'd done before that. Okay. And other people have jumped up and down and said, she shouldn't have done that. I should have been obligated to keep secret stuff that was publicly available. You know, a lot of the hard guards seem to think that things are still secret even if they've already been published. It's bizarre.
Well, it's there's the old joke: how many Gardnerians does it take to screw in a light bulb? Can't
Yeah.
tell you, Kevin Secret.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Um. Anyway, so there was a period there, 77, when I got sober, I had difficulties, working the 12 steps, which I certainly knew I needed to do to stay sober, by using the craft as the support network for it. It just nobody in AA knew anything about the craft. Nobody in the craft knew anything about AA. It was just
Yeah.
out there. And I've been raised Catholic, blew out of it as a teenager, um, but I never dealt with the real physical and theological and other problems of Catholicism as an adult. And so I tried being a practicing Catholic again for during about 10 years. And, helped me keep sober all right. And I dealt with all of that stuff. It was also doing, two New Testament studies as part of my doctoral program. So I really had the information. Um, and, 10 years was enough. I quit doing that and came back to the craft again, um, with not being quite so much a leader as I had been. But I got it to work for me. Well, during that 10 years that I wasn't active, Prue, I don't remember offhand exactly when his initiation date was. I think it was sometime in the 70s. And he'd been able to, pass himself off as the expert on the craft history and root history and whatnot and all that during that period. Well, I came back and started being active in the group again, and he wasn't the big expert anymore, and he really disliked that. And he decided to make life difficult for me, which he did. I mean, he pulled all kinds of crap on me, and I'm not so thick-skinned, but he did get through to me. And finally, um, he got into interfaith work, okay, which he's really good at. He can afford to do it like this, and so that gave him something more interesting to do, and he quit harassing me. Um, um,
But
but
when you
all
harass someone online and put it there, it's forever.
yeah, So, um, for the most part, I've just been forgetting about it. But lately, um, I mean, Fru's flat out lying.
Yeah.
Really is affecting my life now. Unfortunately.
Well, I don't know
Um,
if you know, but in the last couple of years, it's really been the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a resurgence in kind of the pushback. Like, they really all focus on, like, the reason why my podcast episode was all about, like, Mabon and, like, focused on that is because,
mhm.
like, that's their inciting point. And it's like, for the last couple of years, every September, it rolls around that, like,
Yeah.
some Gardnerian gets real mad on the internet and starts dragging up everything, like, and pulling up the Usenet posts from, like, the mid 90s from Fru, and, like, it's just dumbfounding
hmm
to me,
hmm
because,
Yeah.
first off, I think that there's oftentimes, like, because I mean, witchcraft has, like, the modern witchcraft movement has kind of exploded over the past really 15 years, like, compared to where it was. Like, I started in the
hmm
90s because I'm in my 40s, so I started
hmm
as a teenager in the 90s, and but it's really been over the last 15 years. It's kind of been this explosion in witchcraft, and I think a lot of the newer witches today don't always recognize that the people, like, the people involved in the stories that they find, and, like, the people whose books they found, are often, like, even the ones who aren't living, weren't it wasn't that long ago that any of this stuff happened, right? And especially when they come from a point of view, especially, like, for religious witches like Wiccans, and, like, they come from this point of, a lot of them come from Christian backgrounds where, like, if anything is, like, faith related, it's this ancient thing set in stone. They don't realize that a lot of the stuff that, like, that they're reading or they're going through were real interpersonal conflicts between people who are often still here. Like,
Yeah.
these are just people,
hmm
and
Yeah.
that same pettiness that exists in the squabbles that they're dealing with in their own personal lives is exactly what was happening with
Yeah.
the other people in the movement. They're just
Yeah.
people.
Right. Yeah. For sure. One common trait throughout this movement is none of us are saints. That's a basic rule at AA too.
Well, and
Uh,
I see there's been this rise, especially in the last few years, of kind of this purity culture of, like, if you do anything wrong, that, like, you should suddenly all of your work should be condemned. And I've my usual response to that is that if you're not capable of seeing things in shades of gray, maybe witchcraft isn't the right place for you.
yeah, I like that line.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, okay. I don't know where else to go with this. The thing with Mabon, is, and I've explained this in print. Other people explained it in print. Um, as a poet, I was putting out a calendar.
Yeah.
And I liked that we had the Celtic names for the fire festivals, but there were only three names for what
Yeah.
solstices and equinoxes that had pretty much a Saxon background. You know, um, and I didn't like it. It was an aesthetic imbalance in this calendar I was putting out, not to have a name other than autumn equinox. And so I started thinking about, well, what would fit here? And main cultural association with that is that the mysteries of Eleusis about Persephone.
hmm
Okay,
Yeah.
that began at the full moon nearest the fall equinox. And in Judaism, the story of Abraham and Isaac
Yeah.
is read at Rosh Hashanah, which falls on the new moon closest to the fall equinox. You know, so we have these kind of ancient associations. So I said, well, um, is there a northern myth of some sort about the rescue of a child from death? Um, that might be attached here. So I went looking, and there's not one Saxon one, but there was in the Welsh, in the
Yeah.
Mabinogion, that Mabon ap Modron
Yeah.
was rescued from the underworld by King Arthur. Um, Mabon ap Modron, meaning the son of the mother, is quite parallel to Cora as
Right.
being girl, the daughter of the mother. And so that fit.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you keep getting people saying, but Mabon doesn't belong there. He belongs in the spring equinox or whatnot. And look, you don't understand the answer if you don't understand the question. I wasn't asking where he belonged. I was asking
Well, and
what meaning,
yeah.
could fit with the fall equinox.
Well, and I think
Um,
that often the people who make this argument, first off, like I think they just ignore the value of the fact that it's also just nice to have a nice 2-syllable 5-letter name for a
yeah,
holiday, and
yeah.
that
I
like
like your point that Mabon is our own thing. No one else uses
right.
it. Cool.
It's because it's we take a look at the other, like, especially like Yule and things like that. There are pre-existing things that are associated with that name. Now, it's does the autumn equinox really have anything to do with Mabon Modron, like, mythically, besides, like, obviously you've made a thematic connection, but that is arguably just a personal thematic connection. Um,
Mhm.
it's but I really, in the sense of, like, I think that's sometimes it's okay just to give something a good name.
Yeah.
Like, everything's gotta, like, and every association has to start somewhere. Like, everything got a name because someone once decided, hey, let's call this that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that when there's this fetishization of trying to find the oldest name and trying to find something in history. And I'm not saying that it doesn't have value to give something a name that is traditionally associated with it, but I'm just saying it doesn't make it doesn't mean it can't have equal value to then in modernity just come up with a new name to give the thing that we're making. Because if anything, the modern witchcraft movement is less than 100 years. Wicca is less than 100 years old for
Oh yeah.
what Wicca
Yeah.
is. It's like Gardner and Valiente really didn't come up with what we call Wicca now until until Bricket would. It's so I it's okay for something just to be new. And I think
Mhm,
that
mhm, mhm.
this this need to link it back to something older than that is just like, just it's a good name.
I know.
Just give
Well,
it a good name.
yeah. Um, yeah, there's an ongoing human weakness that people's attitude is, well, if Wicca is a new religion, then it's not a real religion because all the real religions are old religions. Looking at Judaism, as the archetype. Well, no. All religions start as new religions at some
Yeah.
time and place. And the fact is, Judaism didn't begin until 621 BC, when Hilkiah of Jerusalem wrote the Book of the Law of Moses that became the core of the Torah. You know, and he
Yeah.
based that on the legend of Moses. That was his foundational myth. Um, and so people would believe we're happier to believe in that Moses was the founder, and Hilkiah just kind of kept himself out of the picture, which is why he's not recognized. Well, Gurdon was doing the same thing. It was easier. People would believe more easily that he had a book passed down from the Middle Ages than that he had wrote all of this
Yeah, well,
himself.
Gardner liked to claim he had a book handed down from the Middle Ages
Yeah,
too, though.
right.
So it's
Exactly.
yeah, it's and the generation of dead grandmothers. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So, Oh crud! I'm losing my train of thought
Sorry.
again. No, well, I do this
I'm
all
very
the
good at
time.
derailing people also.
Yeah. Okay. So where was I going with this? Well, part of this coming up is that um, Fru's lies really are endangering my family at this point. Okay. Um, I've been publishing, a lot of my stuff, self-publishing on Amazon and like this. But just a matter of weeks ago, I had put together an anthology of readings in pagan spirituality. I've taken a lot of historical documents and re-edited them to make them more accessible. I got rid of all the these and thous in this crap because translating, you know, documents from other languages that didn't distinguish between do and z as familiar and formal parts of second person pronoun and all this crap. Well, you clear all that out, and all of a sudden it's much more current. Um, I mean, if you believe that the ISIS is immortal and still around, okay,
Hmm.
if you can read something that sounds like it was written in modern English, all of a sudden that's a better connection. And I was
Right.
able to do this with stuff like this. Anyway, it got to be a good sized manuscript. And so I'd sent it off to a publisher I've known for about 40 years. Mostly it's a courtesy because she's a real nutcase. Um, and she had sent this thing off to an editor to evaluate it. And he wrote back and said, no, it's really publishable, but your problem you may have with Kelly as an author is that the Gardnerians all hate him. Um,
Yeah, but
so I,
honestly, the Gardnerians have very little influence
oh,
on anything
I,
anymore.
I
It's
know.
it, I it, they are such an insignificant percentage of the current movement of even of Wiccans, let alone like because I mean
Hmm.
the current
Hmm.
thing with the modern witchcraft movements is the non-Wiccan modern witches are
Oh
actually
yeah,
starting to increase in such a larger percentage.
oh yeah, I
Yeah.
know. I mean the hard guards, if they were 1% of the total population, um, it's probably an overestimate. They're just the
I mean,
noisiest.
well, it's I mean because Gardnerians only make up a part of British traditional Wicca, and British traditional Wicca is only a fraction of
Hmm.
Wiccans today, and not even a large percentage anymore.
Yeah, I know, I know.
Yeah,
And I'm not quite sure I'm in touch at
I
all with
yeah.
how the movement is evolving.
Arguably, British traditional Wicca hasn't been the majority since at least the '90s, with the
Hmm.
explosion of the publishing boom of witchcraft literature in the '90s.
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
yeah, and I mean like I come from a generation, I'm a solitary eclectic. I self-initiated in the mid 90s. It's,
Hmm. Hmm.
I have never been part of an organized tradition, and the fact is
Okay.
that um most Wiccans I have met in my life come from the direction that I did. Like I've known plenty of Gardnerians over the years, and other British
Hmm.
traditional Wiccans, but they are like I can count on one hand the number that I'm still in contact with. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
like
I know. And among Gardnerians, the hard guards who hate me are a small minority. I'm in
yeah.
touch with plenty of Gardnerians. I'm perfectly good firms with, and like I said, Meredith would be happy to write to you if you wanted to tell you I'm okay with her still. Um, but anyway, so this editor had written back to warn Bev, publisher, she might have a publicity problem with me, and I asked people, including Meredith, to write to her, say that and um, that that my reputation with the hard guards was not something that could possibly affect her. Well, receiving emails from people she didn't know just pissed her off, and she decided to forget it. But the editor turned out to be an old friend, or acquaintance anyway, that I had done some research for. on something he was trying to track down about a coven that existed decades ago. Um, and he was in contact with an editor at Inner Traditions, okay, and mentioned this as manuscript to him, and that editor wanted to see it. Um, so I was able to send the manuscript off to him, and he was able to pitch it to the higher ups, and they're still thinking about it. I may be hearing back. I also told him I had a real research and creative manuscript about Gnosticism that I was just about wrapped up, but he wanted to see that too. So I was able to do some final touches on it and get that off to him. And he's promised to read it and to have read it by tomorrow. He may be able to do that. And so I'll be hearing back from him. And I'm hoping, I will have a real publisher instead of doing self publishing. And I'm kind of hopeful about that, you know. Um, but, you know, what I'm, looking at this point is because of Prue's lies and effect on the hard guards. Um, I have someone interfering, with my being able to be published. The people in traditions don't give a damn about anything about that. They're actually but thinking about being able to tap into this whole witchcraft market, and I would be useful for them to do that. Well, hopefully, it's all looking. I don't know. It's looking encouraging considering what health and financial problems my family is going through right now.
Mm.
Um, so that would be a good thing. Um, you know, and I haven't wasted any energy on Fru for at least 20 years. Um, so having like something like this pop up, because of the other
Yeah.
podcast, it's just
Well, it's
Jesus Christ.
it's honestly like I hadn't heard anyone complain about you for years until like 2 years ago when that Seeking Witchcraft episode came out and it was suddenly getting passed around, and that's when like the backlash really kind of started,
Hmm.
like the new one. And so it's just because it's like we talk about Fru, like it's he's not saying anything new. It's just that people found his posts from 25
Yeah,
years ago, and
yeah,
so it's yeah, because when you put it on the internet, it stays forever.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and
for
every
sure.
yeah. Oh, I hope nobody finds my posts from the 90s. Anyways, but yeah,
Well, okay. Well, I think all of that kind of
yeah,
covers everything I wanted to share with you about this.
yeah,
Um, People need to understand that religions are human creations. You know, you can believe if you want that God inspired the scriptures, but he always had to recruit a human being to do the actual writing for him. Ever notice that? You know? uh, and it's just my viewpoint as a no as a Gnostic really um, is believing in historical nonsense is bad for your mental health. You know, if you
yeah,
believe something that's simply factually untrue, and then you base a decision, even in part, on that, the consequences may be catastrophic. You cannot predict what might go wrong. You know,
yeah,
uh, it's not a good idea for people to be in that kind of danger. You know,
yeah,
um, instead of having philosophical um, criteria or something. Yeah, part of the problem I have with the hard guards is that it's again bad mental health. The people have simply believed what Prue has said, and that other people had repeated without ever going and checking it out. You know, um,
yeah. It's like it because I also think like there are people. I mean, there are a good percentage of people like me who just didn't care if what he said was true, because
Mhm.
like it's like to be fair, like I never thought to investigate. You know, it's I read Fru's accusations, I heard what Gardnerian said, and my like I knew that you maintained that you hadn't, you know, betrayed your oath,
Mhm.
but like it was like for me, like the point of view I was coming at it from was like, okay, so if the worst thing the guy did was betray his Gardnerian oaths, I mean that like in that situation, yeah, that would be kind of crappy to do if that were true, but
Mhm.
like I always felt like, you know what, it always came up in like the context it would always come up in would be like you'd bring up that you know the work you published, like, you know, revealing the, you know, the kind of uh, the fact that Wicca wasn't ancient and all this stuff, and like that like the Gardnerians had kind of been like, whether they had purposely been pushing a lie, they had, you know, like I'm not saying that they were purposely doing it, but they had at least unquestionably been pushing a lie, and like it almost seems like it's in a lot of cases it's an attempt to absolve responsibility of that action by saying, ah, but the person who revealed it, they're the real villain of this piece, you know. And it's like,
Mhm.
pay no attention to this. I'm, you know, it's that's the part that always drove me nuts. And so it's like I was like, it was frustrating to me that they would always try to change the subject to that instead of dealing with the implications of what had been revealed to begin with. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Mhm. Mhm.
That's I don't know, for
Yeah.
like I came from the generation, like it's so like while your work had been published when I became a Wiccan, it wasn't still widely known. All of the resources that were out there still presented Wicca as this ancient thing when I became a Wiccan. Like, and it's a lot. It's amazing to me that within the Wiccan community that the idea that the age of the religion persisted well even into the 2000s for a lot of like published sources and things like that. And like it I it was actually kind of very freeing to me that when I did learn in my 20s that like that Wicca wasn't ancient, and that like it I think it's actually kind of freeing for Wicca that Gerald Gardner was such a flawed person, because there's an
Mhm. Mhm.
instinct to venerate the people who start
Mhm.
things. Like
Of
there's an
course.
instinct to venerate him as a figure, and by just like, no, he was kind of making stuff up, is like it's freeing to recognize that this person was just a flawed human being, and actually like it means that we're following this not because it was given to like I became a Wiccan not because the person who created, like the founder of the religion, was this great person. No, it's because the idea was good, like, and that the ideas of it resonated with me, and I don't need to, like, I can hold the ideas to themselves and not the person who came up with them.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so not having to venerate that, like it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I know. Yeah. But yeah, like I said, in the messages, I appreciate the publicity. I think it was P.T. Barnum who said something like, any publicity is good publicity. You know,
Yeah, and I
he's
mean,
also.
yeah. I mean, I definitely recommend people check out your stuff. Like it's also like historically important for the modern witchcraft movement. Your works are important, and I think that needs to be acknowledged. You
Hmm.
know, whether people agree with you or not, you know, they should
Hmm.
read you. And I think that's important.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That may increase book sales. That'd be a good thing. Yeah. Um, yeah, self publishing. I mean, the woman I sent the stuff to has been on my case a lot that self publishing is a waste of time. You need a real publisher like me, and then she's just impossible to work with.
Yeah. It's I mean, honestly, self-publishing is not the worst. I mean,
No.
it limits you on distribution, it's true, but
Hmm.
I don't know. It's I mean, if it's the route to get the work out, it's the route to get the work out.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
self-publishing is the boom in self-publishing has been a double-edged sword. It's gotten a lot of people who deserve to be published past the gatekeepers of traditional publishing, but it means that everybody can get past the gatekeepers of traditional publishing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the signal to noise ratio is just, ugh.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
it has like allowed some people to, like, it's actually been really helpful in like the secular witchcraft movement. um like a lot of the book, like a lot of the books that I recommend for people to read in that realm, none of them are published by a major publishing house, because the people who normally publish witchcraft books usually lean towards Wicca and will lean towards like more religious witchcraft. But the secular witchcraft movement, like Brina Guerin, who is a writer who she also has a podcast on the network that I'm on. She like her book Grove Daughter Witchery is self-published, but it is like
Mm-hmm.
when beginners come to me and ask me for book recommendations, that is the first book I usually put them towards if they're looking at non-Wiccan witchcraft, like
Hmm.
for like a useful book for beginners. And
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
there's no way, like it's and it's, she still works a day job, but it's
Mm-hmm.
done well
Mm-hmm.
enough in sales. But she self-publishes that through Amazon, through the
Mm-hmm.
Kindle Direct
Mm-hmm.
Publishing, because that
Wow.
was the only way to get the book out there.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. It's much better to do it that way than have the damn manuscripts, getting moldy in the bottom of the closet.
Yeah.
Oh, what's her name? Because
uh,
I hadn't heard of her, and I'll try
oh
to look that
yeah,
up.
her name is Brina Guerin, BREENICGARRAN.
Okay. Okay. Again, I'll try writing it down.
Okay. It's her first name is Bree,
Okay.
and the last name Nagarin is
Mm-hmm.
NICGARRAN.
Okay.
And
Okay.
and the book of hers I
I'll
recommend
try.
is, Grove Daughter
Yeah.
Witchery is the book I usually recommend of hers.
Hmm. Rogue.
Grove Daughter, as in
Grove. Oh,
GROVE.
Grove Daughter.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll look that up. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be useful. Um, it's very odd that I just got a message a day or so ago from a guy named Mickey who lives in Tacoma like I do. And he said he'd been finally reading Drawing Down the Moon, and it mentioned in there I was in Tacoma. And so he sent me a message to see if I was still here. And yes, I am. And so I'm going to meet with him next week sometime so he can pick my brains, he said. Okay. I'll be what help I can. I mean, my wife and I do not run an active coven now. I just, not with health problems. And, one problem about not being able to charge people for initiations and teachings and whatnot is it means there's very hard to have a fair energy exchange to make it worthwhile to keep up with doing that. You know, I've been writing something right now, putting together yet another manuscript of. I'm thinking of titling Wicca 501, Witchcraft for the Elders, um, giving hints on now, advanced material to maybe arouse your interest again and cure the burnout some from. Oh, really? I one which I knew, Chris, who's on Staten Island, had the bad habit of cooking a banquet for her coven every time they're coming over and doing the dishes herself afterward. And I'm saying, no, if you want to be able to keep doing this, you have these people come over. If they want to eat, they bring and cook the food and clean up, and do the dishes themselves afterward, and they clean up the temple room to make it spotless in honor of the goddess before you do the circle, you know, etc.
Hmm.
You can't allow anything about the covenant to stress you out physically, emotionally, um, financially. Um, and yeah, of course, you're supposed to do spiritual counseling with covenant members. That's just part of the role. But you have to be able to recognize um, You know, you do that because your once born psychologists and psychiatrists who consider any type of religion to be a mental illness are not going to do them much help. You know,
Yeah.
but you also got to recognize that some of those people do need professional help, and you can't help them, and they can't function in the covenant, and you've got to let them go,
Yeah.
and that's hard. Um, but it's a reality. You know.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping this will be a viable manuscript too,
Yeah.
maybe for this publisher if they're taking me on. I hope.
I'll
Yeah,
knock on wood for you.
yeah. Thank you.
I want to thank Aidan Kelly for letting me record that conversation. And remember, he's got books, he's got stuff available. If you are interested in reading his stuff, I do actually recommend that everybody, like, his work is kind of deeply important for the history of the movement, whether you agree with him or not. So I'm going to include some links in the description on YouTube and in the show notes for the normal podcast version, and obviously on my website at bsforwitchcraft.com. I'll put links there, and please consider, sending a few dollars his way. I know he'd appreciate it. I want to thank you guys, though, for tuning in to yet another month of this. We've given you a few long episodes. We're going to go back down to the shorter length, probably starting next month, but who knows what can happen in life. Remember, this show is brought to you by my lovely patrons on Patreon. Remember, even at $1 a month, you can get episodes like this a whole week early. And again, I want to give a shout out to the people at my shout out tier of Stephanie Graves, Lindsay Dosey, Bruce Norville, Courtney, Amber Schmidt, Echo of Truth, Claire Dennis, Kayla Burkowski, and Katie Williams. And, I understand if you can't afford to contribute, that's cool. But just consider passing this show around social media. You can follow me on social media. I'm traegorn.tumblr.com. That's the big one. You can follow the show on Facebook at facebook.com/bsfreewitchcraft. I'm on TikTok at the username TRAEGORN. On and off. Like, I'll go through spurts of being active for like a month or two and then like take 6 months off. But right now we're in an active pattern, at least when I'm recording this. Who knows by the time the episode comes out. I get frustrated with witch talk real easy. And then technically I'm on Twitter still. Every time I say that during a recording, I'm always like, will Twitter still exist by the time the episode comes out? Who knows? At time of recording, I'm still on Twitter at TRAEGORN, although mostly it's just pointing towards my Tumblr at this point. Yeah, and remember, we're part of the Nerd and Tie Podcast Network, and if you want to have conversations with me and other hosts of Nerd and Tie Podcast Network shows, join our Discord, and you can find an invite for that at nerdandtie.com/Discord. And, remember, there's a bunch of other great podcasts on the Nerd and Tie Podcast Network, including Hex Positive, which is coming back in 2023 after hiatus. So, Brina Guerin, author of Grove Daughter Witchery, is just, her show is great, and you should listen to that if you want more witchcraft podcast stuff. Like, honestly, if you're listening to this show and you're not listening to that show, you should also listen to that show. It's just, this is they go together. We're like peanut butter and jelly. It should be your full witchcraft sandwich. I could have made a good pun there, and I just did not. And that should tell you exactly what kind of a week I'm having. So, hope you guys all have a happy new year, and I will talk to you again in January. Remember, magicians, dirt in our fingernails, brick in our hands.